Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Class 11, where we are continuing our discussion of agonism. In this class, we'll be looking more at thinking about the economic competition as a way in which these agonistic tendencies get sublimated into political society and political theory. So we're looking at our good friend Friedrich Hayek once again, looking more explicitly on his thoughts on equality and market competition. And also more infamously looking at Ayn Rand, this lengthy speech from John Galt in the novel Atlas Shrugged. So I want to start by thinking a little bit about this speech from that Rand writes in Atlas Shrugged. This is from her 1957 novel Atlas Shrugged. And in the novel, Rand depicts a dystopian United States that's in the midst of an economic depression. The infrastructure is collapsing everywhere, and she ultimately blames these economic stagnation on a series of what she calls statist interventions into the economy, various attempts to ensure price controls, to kind of direct or plan the economy in a Hayekian sense. But importantly, in Rand's story, the government is seizing intellectual property. The inventions are being seized. Patent law is not being protected. That any sort of invention of new technology is being given to the federal government, and they're kind of colonizing the profits there. The other kind of problem with the causing this economic depression is the behavior of what Rand describes as irrational businessmen who are unwilling to actually take responsibility for the risks they take, that are not making good, sound business decisions. And in contrast, the hero of Atlas Shrugged, John Galt, organizes a strike of the mind where he basically takes all of the wealthy investors, composers, artists, financiers, businessmen, industrialists, and they leave this world and they go into what Ayn Rand literally calls the utopia of greed. In Galt's Gulch, they kind of like build this utopia. They basically withdraw from the world to try to prove that like the world actually needs these great men, and that the rest of the world are just leeching off of the work of these men. And at one point in the novel, John Galt takes over the radio broadcast and gives this 50-page, 60-page speech that you have some excerpts from. I've tried to cut down it as much as possible, but all of Rand's writing is very lengthy and didactic and lectury. So in this speech, Galt says, this is towards the end of the speech, "Such is the future you are capable of winning." This kind of utopia of freedom and individualism. It requires a struggle, so does any human value. All life is a purposeful struggle, and your only choice is the choice of a goal. Do you wish to continue the battle of your present, or do you wish to fight for my world? Do you wish to continue a struggle that consists of clinging to precarious ledges and a sliding descent to the abyss? A struggle where the hardships you endure are irreversible, and the victories you win bring you closer to destruction? Or do you wish to undertake a struggle that consists of rising from ledge to ledge and a steady ascent to the top? A struggle where the hardships are investments in your future and the victories bring you irreversibly closer to the world of your moral idea, and should you die without reaching the sunlight, you will die in a level touched by its rays. My brothers in spirit, check on your virtues and on the nature of your enemies you're serving. Your destroyers hold you by the means of your endurance, your generosity, your innocence. In the name of the best within you, do not sacrifice this world to those who are its worst in the name of the values that keep you alive. Do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels unlimited roads. The world you desired can be won. It exists, it is real, it is possible, it is yours, but to win it requires your total dedication and a total break from the world of your past with the doctrine that man is a sacrificial animal who exists for the pleasure of others. Fight for the value of your person, fight for the virtue of your pride, fight for the essence of that which is man, his sovereign rational mind. Fight for the radical, radiant creativity and the absolute rectitude of knowing that yours is the morality of life and that yours is the battle for any achievement, any value, any grandeur, any goodness, any joy that has ever existed on this earth. You will win when you are ready to pronounce the oath that I have taken at the start of my battle. And for those who wish to know who know the day of my return, I shall now repeat it hearing to the world. I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, or nor ask another man to live for mine. In this kind of closing of the speech, we get all of the kind of Randian greatest hits that selfishness is the only virtue, that the heroic individual is like the goal, is the center of all philosophy, that any attempts of altruism are really just attempts of the leechers and the worst people in society to take what is rightfully yours, and that you should fight for your own radical individualism. And in which case she kind of echoes, without any of the kind of philosophical sophistication of Nietzsche, the worst parts of Nietzsche's philosophy, this kind of embrace of radical individualism, this embrace of a kind of hedonism, embrace of a radical elitism and anti-majoritarianism, without any of the sense of irony or sense of kind of critical disposition that Nietzsche possesses. And so today we're going to be looking at the way in which the economic competition forms this agonistic framework, thinking about market competition as this aim beyond good and evil for Hayek, and then looking at Ayn Rand's kind of conception of the businessman as the Nietzschean Übermensch. But let's kind of return to Hayek. In this first chapter that I had you read for today, The Creative Powers of a Free Society, we get a kind of remix or reiteration of Hayek's greatest hits, right? This idea that we are profoundly ignorant of what other people value and what their motivations are. We don't know what other people are thinking, and that we can't know all the totality of interactions in an economic system, and that the only way that we can respond to this ignorance, this lack of knowledge, is through liberal individualism to protect for individual rights, and free markets, because this allows for flexible, dynamic responses to this ignorance in a way that can distribute goods in an efficient manner. And again, this idea that morals and social norms emerge aren't kind of static, aren't pre-given, aren't given by reason, but they emerge through these evolutionary competitive processes of society, right? That the morals that we have are the function of them providing a certain service for people, that they have allowed for a certain group of people to achieve and maintain a certain level of social stability. And then we also get this this new idea. We start getting these more like Nietzschean ideas now towards later in this chapter, where on page 83, where Hayek writes that freedom, granted only when it is known beforehand that its effects will be beneficial, is not freedom. If we knew that how freedom would be used, the case for it would disappear. We shall never gain the benefits of freedom, never obtain the unforeseeable new developments for which it provides the opportunity, if it is not also granted where the use of it made by some do not seem desirable. Freedom necessarily means many things will be done which we do not like. That freedom for Hayek does not mean freedom only when it's like beneficial to us, or only when people do things that we agree with, but freedom requires a kind of more absolute sense of freedom that will end up, that means that allows for others to act in ways that we might disagree with, or to take risks that we would not personally ourselves take. And so we get a little bit of a glimpse of a kind of heroism in this chapter. At one point, Hayek talks about how that the freedom of one person might be more beneficial than than a freedom that we all use, right? So that you have to maintain absolute freedom for Hayek, even if only one or two people would ever make use of a particular freedom, and the majority actually don't think we should have that freedom. Because these rare individuals might be able to do something with that freedom that is fundamentally transforms and benefits society, this freedom of thought or freedom of creativity or experimentation, in this very Nietzschean sense that we saw in the Greek state, that we have to free these rare individuals to create culture and art that will justify and redeem humanity. And Hayek also has this kind of agonistic conception of both the market and society, that this is that the society and markets are these competitive selective mechanisms, that we select values through competition. This very Nietzschean idea that our moral values emerge through struggle, through competition between different moral systems. And this can be either between individuals or between organized groups and interests. But competition is always kind of what drives social norms and social progress. Now, in the next chapter, the equality, value, and merit section, Hayek makes this kind of argument about market competition being, in Nietzsche's language, beyond good and evil, that the markets are amoral. They do not kind of track moral outcomes here. And this begins with this distinction that he draws between value and merit, that what we are doing in economic exchange, and that we are not rewarding, we're not paying people based on their merit or their hard work or what they deserve, that we are just, that when I pay someone for some good service, it's simply an expression of how much I value that good or service. And so Hayek says that this has little to do with what we would call moral merit or deserts. It's not kind of rewarding hard work. It's not saying that you deserve this money or you've earned this money. It's just, when I buy this chair from you for a certain amount of money, I am valuing that chair for myself. And so for Hayek, this means that demands for social justice are ultimately a category mistake, because it is trying to impose moral categories on something that is fundamentally not a question of justice, that there's no justice in the market, in a way that probably many people on the left would agree with. But for Hayek, it would be wrong to kind of apply the language of justice to the market, because in doing, the market isn't a person. The market is this kind of emergent phenomenon of a bunch of different individuals interacting, and to kind of give people what they deserve, or what they are due according to merit, which is basically a kind of like the language of social justice, is that to give everyone what they are due, would be to relieve people from responsibility and risk of decisions and actions, and would require this illiberal kind of violation of his kind of tenet that we are ignorant of what people value. It would be for one person or group of people to impose their values on another group of people by determining how much someone is worth, or someone's actions or work is worth, or how much they deserve. And for Hayek, that is profoundly illiberal and dangerous. What he thinks of as justice, the only thing that he kind of maintains as justice, is this idea of equality before the law, or equality of the general rules of law and conduct, because this is what is compatible with freedom and liberty. And he argues that the mistake of kind of social demands for social justice are kind of attempting to demand equal treatment is this a flawed assumption that human beings are inherently equal. And he says basically that human beings factually are not equal, and by this he means both in terms of like, we have different talents. Some of us are more skilled at particular things than others, but also that like he goes on in this chapter to talk about how we are born into different social circumstances that make us unequal, and to impose equality on unequal things is unjust for Hayek. And then we see further Nietzschean themes later in this chapter. In the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche argues that this demand for moral equality and moral justice is a product of the resentment of the weak towards the strong. And Hayek more or less makes this similar argument here, where he says like demands for equality and social justice are the result of envy, that these rest on the discontent that the success of some people often produces in those who are less successful. He basically says that all demands for social justice are the result of resentment and envy and discontent, and not any sort of moral principles. It's a very Nietzschean idea that morality is a kind of form of revenge. And then he goes on to kind of suggest that the market kind of outcomes are going to be unpredictable, and we need to keep the market free so that it's simply responding to people's risk tolerance and their knowledge and their skills and what different people value. But then he says that when we end up with that we're going to inevitably lead to inequality of results, of differential distributions of income and wealth. And to say that this is just or unjust is just simply meaningless for him. That he does think that there should be a certain amount of equality when it comes to any sort of government programs or government laws, right? If there's going to be government kind of government social security systems, that those should be equal. So everyone is treated equally by the government. So he would be very much against affirmative action or anything like that. But given the fact that if you have equal laws and equal playing field, given that people are unequal, people have different talents, people have talents that are valued differently by others, you're inevitably going to have inequality. And for Hayek, that inequality is good because it provides an incentive for people to pursue what is valuable to society, right? If you're building If you're writing books that no one's buying, for example, that should tell, the fact that you're living in poverty because no one's buying your books should tell you that you need to provide a more socially valuable service in Hayek's framework, right? When you look and see that, like, oh, this other person is making a lot more money than me, then you kind of that creates an incentive for you in Hayek's system to provide a similarly socially valuable service. And that's kind of how the inequality for Hayek is both an inherent part of markets, but it is also a good thing. It helps it's how markets provide these socially corrective functions. But the key idea here for Hayek is this amorality of markets, that we should not confuse the outcomes and the distributions that market competition create with any sort of moral claim, any claim that the people morally deserve their wealth. And when we turn to Rand, we see a very different element here. Where Hayek is the much more sophisticated Nietzschean, the amoralist, right? Rand is the Nietzschean of you know what? No, I'm the best. I do whatever I want, and I'm a superior person, and everyone should love me. That with Rand, we get this idea that markets reward superior men, and for Rand, it's pretty much always men. She always uses male pronouns, and even when some of her heroes are heroines, Rand really thinks of the heroic individual as this heroic man. But who is Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand was born to a Russian Jewish family in St. Petersburg. Her family was moderately wealthy, as her father owned a pharmacy in St. Petersburg. When the Russian Revolution in 1917 swept through Russia, her family's pharmacy was confiscated and nationalized, an event that she referred to throughout her life as formative for her own political thinking. But yet at the same time, the Russian Revolution opened up universities to women, allowing her to attend Petrograd State University at the age of 16, where she studied philosophy, where she was exposed to Aristotle, who she claims to be her kind of most important influence. She studied Nietzsche, she studied Dostoevsky and other Russian writers, and this all wouldn't have happened without the Russian Revolution that she blames for like all these bad things. She in 1925 emigrated to the United States. She originally received a visa to visit relatives in Chicago. She became enthralled by the skyline of New York when she arrived, and she endeavored to stay in the United States, gaining first legal permanent residency status and then eventually citizenship. And she went to Hollywood. She had a chance meeting with the filmmaker Cecile B. DeMille, and got her foot in the door in Hollywood as a junior screenwriter while she was working on her own novels. Her biographers, many commentators on Rand, kind of point to this experience in Hollywood to explain why her fiction is so melodramatic, that all of her fiction there's no real complexity. It's all very didactic morality play. It's very kind of simplistic and Hollywood-esque, this kind of enamoration with Hollywood. Throughout her life, she developed, and in her novels, she developed her philosophy of objectivism, which she describes as having the central tenet of the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, the product of achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. Now, the idea of objectivism refers to her belief in a pure objective reality that we can access directly through our senses and through our use of our reason and intellect, against both the mysticism of religion and against social constructionism. So this is a little bit confusing because we've kind of framed conservatism as this reaction against reason and rationalism. And when Rand is using reason, she's kind of using reason not in the sense of that we can kind of divine some higher order rational principles, but simply reason like my ability to observe and make judgments about the external world. Her epistemology and metaphysics are not particularly sophisticated. She's not really engaging in any of these philosophical debates at the time. She just kind of asserts that, like, well, A equals A, therefore there's an objective reality that I can access directly without any sort of mediating social constructions or concepts, and that therefore means I'm allowed to do whatever I want, is basically how her philosophical thinking works. Ethically, she argued in favor of ethical egoism, that the only ethical obligations that any individual has are to themselves, that they do not have any ethical obligations to other people whatsoever. And her first commercially successful novel was The Fountainhead, and this novel centers on this young architect named Howard Rourke, and his struggle against those a bunch of like conformist architects that Rand calls second-handers. They try to, it's a whole story about how like his creative genius is not being recognized by the architectural community because they are just trying to like leech off of his genius and profit from it. It was originally rejected by 12 publishers before being accepted by the Bobbs Merrill Company on the persistence of the editor Archibald Ogden, who threatened to quit if his employer did not publish it. In 1957, she published her magnum opus, Atlas Shrugged, presenting lengthy didactic lessons like the one that you read that expressed her philosophy. This novel has a plot. It's kind of a dystopian novel about in the future United States. It's mostly about trains and like bridges collapsing and like metallurgy. It's real bad. It's not a good novel. It's like objectively not good writing. But Rand is more famous for her kind of influence and opinions. She often gave speeches and Q&A sessions where she would take very controversial stances on whatever the political and social issue of the day was. Which often put her kind of outside of the conservative mainstream. And as we talked about with William F. Buckley Jr. last week, he did not view Rand as a conservative. This is because she supported abortion rights. She opposed the Vietnam War and the military draft. And she also supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. She defended European colonialism as having the right to develop land taken by Native Americans. She called homosexuality immoral and disgusting, while also advocating the repeal of all laws about it. She endorsed several Republican candidates, and most strongly Barry Goldwater, whose candidacy she promoted in her newsletter. And she's had a particular influence on American libertarianism and 16-year-old boys like Professor Sardo in a past life. Alan Greenspan, former head of the Fed, was a devout student of Rand. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, more or less pulled a Margaret Thatcher and said like Atlas Shrugged shaped his philosophy in the same way that Thatcher praised the Hayek's Constitution of Liberty. And Rand saw a pretty large resurgence in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, including the creation of a terrible 3-part movie adaptation of Atlas Shrugged. So part of the plot is this strike that John Galt puts on. He kind of takes all of the leading men away from the moochers of the world. And he says, while you are dragging to your sacrificial altars the men of justice, of independence, of reason, of wealth and self-esteem, I reach them first. I showed them the way to live by another morality, mine, and it's mine they chose to follow. All the men who have vanished, the men you hated, you dreaded, yet dreaded to lose. It is I who have taken them away from you. Do not attempt to find us. We do not choose to be found. Do not cry that it is our duty to serve you. We do not recognize such duty. Do not cry that you need us. We do not consider need a claim. Do not cry that you own us. You don't. Do not beg us to return. We are on strike. We men of the mind. We are on strike against self-immolation. We are on strike against the creed of unearned reserves and unrewarded duties. We are on strike against the dogma that the pursuit of one's happiness is evil. We are on strike against the doctrine that life is guilt. So we see a lot of Nietzschean themes just in this paragraph, that modern morality is a morality of self-denial and guilt and resentment, that great individuals give meaning and value to a society or a culture, that the world would collapse into meaninglessness without these rare great individuals. That there's a zero-sum conflict between the forces of this true morality and this like bad morality. And we see also throughout the speech aspects of Rand's philosophy. Basically, his kind of moral standards are that whatever is proper to the life of a rational being is good, and all that destroys it is evil. It's a very kind of simplest, hedonistic, egoistic philosophy. Whatever benefits me is good, whatever destroys it is evil. Very kind of Nietzschean noble morality. And she also writes that the most selfish thing is the independent mind that recognizes no authority higher than its own. And here we get, Rand is kind of closer to this Enlightenment rationalism and self-construction here idea. But it's premised not on the idea of like a universal principle of reason, but a very individualistic principle of reason. She goes on to argue, similar to kind of Hayek, that justice requires that you have to judge men truthfully, and by truthfully she means that you would reward better men for being better and worse men for being worse, comparing like just in the same way that you wouldn't pay, you would pay more money for a piece of gold than for scrap metal. You would pay a hero of a war, a established powerful businessman more than a robber or rotter. And she kind of claims that she has Galt claim that he supports his life neither by robbery nor alms, and by robbery he includes like taxes and any form of social support, and that his entire life is the product of his own selfless achievement. And like Schmidt, there are two sides to every issue. One is right, the other is wrong, but the middle is always evil. And this gives us also a kind of sense of his politics, Rand's politics. For Rand, the proper government is only a policeman. There's three functions of the government: the police to protect you from criminals, the army to protect you from foreign invaders, and the courts to protect your property. That is the extent of politics. That is the extent of what the government should do. And then there is going to be a hierarchical society. She talks about how the man at the top of the intellectual period, these geniuses, these wise men, they contribute all to society but gain nothing but their material payment, but all they want is freedom to think and work as they choose, to take their own risks, bear their own losses, and earn their own fortunes. This kind of similar like Nietzschean idea here, that this hierarchical society actually produces more benefits for everyone. Now, thinking a little bit about this heroic philosophy, we can think about Rand's own life. She collected Social Security payments and Medicare benefits under the name of Anne O'Connor. Her husband's name was Frank O'Connor. And she had medical needs. She had lung cancer. She needed medical treatment, and she was entitled to these rights, despite opposing them. And then more recently, you might have heard that the Ayn Rand Institute in Santa Ana, California, recently received $1 million in Paycheck Protection Program loans from the federal government to preserve 35 of its jobs. And Ayn Rand kind of doesn't think, she kind of addressed this issue in a 1968 article. We're talking about public scholarships and public support. So she talks about how the recipient of a public scholarship, like a Pell Grant or something like that, is morally justified only so long as he regards it as restitution and opposes all form of welfare statism. Those who advocate public scholarships have no right to them. Only those who oppose them have. And similarly, she says that a scientist is morally justified in accepting government grants as long as he opposes all forms of welfare statism. So there's this weird counterintuitive idea that only those who think that these programs should exist are morally allowed to partake in them, which is some circular reasoning that we can talk about in class. And the Ayn Rand Institutes, in a blog post from 2014, talked about how Rand rejects collectivist notions behind any redistributive schemes like Social Security, welfare, anything like that. But precisely, they argue, this is quoting this article, blog post, precisely because Rand views welfare programs like Social Security as legalized plunder, she thinks that the only condition under which it is moral to collect Social Security is if one regards it as restitution. This quote here. The seeming contradiction that only the opponents of Social Security has the moral right to collect it dissolves, she argues, once you recognize the crucial difference between voluntary and coerced. So she kind of weasels her way out of this by saying that, like, because she opposed it, she has a right to it. Happy to talk about this more in class, if it's even a reasonable position or not. So some questions to consider as you finish the reading, and we look towards class next week. How aligned are Hayek and Rand in terms of their political thought? Where do they converge? Where do they diverge? What kind of agonistic elements do you see in their thinking, other than the ones that I've kind of foregrounded? How does economic agonism sit with the skeptical and traditional forms of conservatism? And what aspects of Hayek's and Rand's thinking do you see in contemporary politics? That's it for this lecture. I will see you in class Monday and Wednesday to discuss Hayek, Rand, and economic competition.